led by the Egyptian government with the role of the private sector. But one important player in the development of this policy has been the AAAM, the African Association of Automotive Manufacturers. Today, we will learn more about what the mandate of the AAAM is in terms of expanding and supporting various African governments in developing their own automotive strategies. And we will start by our colleague Mike Whitfield, who will give us a perspective on the mandate of AAAM and what it has done so far in terms of supporting African countries to develop its automotive policies. Mike is the president of the AAAM for this round. He's also the managing director of Nissan Egypt, and also the managing director of Nissan South Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. Mike, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and it's good to be back up here. And once again, as I said earlier to Mohammed and the team, a great event and certainly an opportunity to share where and what the automotive industry in Egypt can do. A key component of that is, as was referred to as the AAAM, or the African Association of Auto Manufacturers, which consists of a number of global OEM members. In addition to that, we have a number of Tier 1 global suppliers, we have Tier 2 suppliers, we have various members from different countries all over Africa. In fact, we have a number of members from the Egyptian auto industry, so please, you're all welcome to be part of it. But let me share with you first and foremost, who are we and what do we do? We focus very simply on the expansion and deepening of the automotive industry across Africa by working with governments to seize and provide support to attract investors to those markets, to unlock the economic potential of the continent, and to align a global network of stakeholders who have a commitment to develop the automotive industry in Africa. As I said earlier, certainly something that all of us in the industry recognize is Africa is without doubt the last frontier of the automotive industry. There's not too many continents where you can say with certainty that in the next 10 years the total industry volume is going to double. In fact, it will be more than that. The big issue in Africa is not if, it's a case of when and where. So for us, our vision and mission, as I say, is to drive automotive industrialization. We need to develop sustainable mobility solutions. We link throughout the automotive chain, the value chain. We cannot have a situation where every country manufactures vehicles, but we can certainly have a situation where different elements of the different countries in the continent add value to the full automotive value chain. A very good example is the majority or significant proportion of raw rubber comes from West Africa. No value is added. The raw rubber is sent to other processing plants outside of Africa to come back as rubber components, tires, etc. We need to add value here. The continent controls the majority of minerals and raw materials that are critical to the growth in the electric vehicle industry that Ankush referred to earlier. We need to add value to those raw materials in the continent that we are. Obviously, also very importantly, we work actively to ensure that automotive forms a critical element of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. All countries bar one in Africa have signed, and Egypt is certainly a signatory towards that. And the key element of that we're busy negotiating at the moment, and I think Dave may touch on that, is the fact that we will establish with the Continental Free Trade Agreement Secretariat and the members a rules of origin, that's the rules of Africa originating content. At this stage it looks like 40% Africa's originating content. And very importantly, we work with a close partner of ours and a good support of ours, the Africa Exim Bank, in how we can create funding to actually grow the industry and to grow the value chain throughout the African continent.
Thank you, Mike. Dr. Ahmed Fikri Abdul Wahab is no stranger to the automotive industry, and he's also a very active participant in the operations and the role that AAAM has played in supporting Egypt on developing its automotive policy. And I want to take this opportunity to ask Dr. Ahmed to elaborate more in terms of the role of AAAM in developing Egypt's automotive policy and how it's creating opportunities for the local feeding industries here in Egypt.
Thank you very much. Let me, as has been introduced by Mr. Mike Whitfield, we see a very big opportunity for the automotive industry in Egypt and in Africa. But let me go back, and many of you know me. I've been working in this field for the better part of 30 years, be it in the component industry or the manufacturing and assembly of automobiles. And throughout the past 20 years, we've been actively pursuing a dream to see a policy, a clear industrial policy for Egypt when it comes to the automotive sector, with a strong belief that industry in the automotive field does not really happen by coincidence. It needs a clear government vision. Now, so that I don't take a long time explaining all of this, I think let me come to the point that with the introduction of the AAAM into Egypt, Mike and the ex-president of the AAAM, as well as Dr. Marcus Till, we approached the government very clearly and made it clear that governments do not see development of the industry unless there is a clear government policy. And the good thing is the government saw this and agreed to this, and we offered to support the Egyptian government in tailoring a program for the industrialization and the development of industry in Egypt, and the government took us on board, accepted the offer, and we worked very closely, the AAAM, as well as the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Trade and Industry, the Ministry of Environment, in creating a policy, an industrial policy, that incentivizes volume production. Now, as I said, I've been working in this field for a number of years. All along, we've been looking at industrialization without really giving big focus on volume production. It's now time to look at volume production as a key driver to develop this industry. So the idea is that OEMs would focus on one, possibly two models. This model would be produced in volumes, tens of thousands, and against these volumes, the OEM gets credits that enables them to get the full range that they're looking for. Now, this is where the AAAM has worked very closely with us in looking at successful models in Africa and seeing how we can fit such a model in the Egyptian setup. So we worked closely with the Ministry of Finance. We created a chapter for the components that come in for the manufacture of cars. We've worked very closely with the Ministry of Finance in creating a fund, and the law has been issued for this. We've also created a Supreme Council that will enable us to see the current trends, where the industry is going, and how we can take it from there. So this accumulated experience in the AAAM has enabled us to work closely with the government and to have what I would say, hopefully, a very good and robust program for the development of this industry in Egypt. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. Now I want to turn to Dave Coffey. Dave is the CEO of the AAAM, and he also comes from a deep expertise in the automotive sector. And Dave, if you can kindly shed light very briefly on the opportunities that AAAM is creating for Egyptian automotive industry players in other African markets. I've seen you in action in Egypt several times, going around and meeting different industry players. If you can shed light in terms of where this strategy of AAAM is going in terms of opening up business opportunities for Egyptian companies in other African countries.
Thank you for the opportunity. And it's good to see friends in the audience with the camera pan that took place there. Let's just start off by looking at the vehicle demand in Africa. In 2021, new vehicle demand across Africa was just under 1.1 million vehicles. But the opportunity we really have is that there is an unregulated importation of 3 to 5 million used vehicles per year into Africa. And many of these vehicles are not roadworthy. So we believe with the right implementation of the right and progressive automotive policies across Africa, we can increase this new vehicle demand from that level to at least 3.3 million, and that's conservatively estimated by researchers, to possibly 5 million by the year 2035. And one may say, well, where have we seen that in the world? If we just look at India, for example, India has a very similar population to Africa, 1.3 billion. The Indian GDP last year per capita was around 2,300 per individual dollars. And in Africa, it's just over 2,000. And yet, India last year had a demand of 3.7 million vehicles. That excludes motorcycles. And in Africa, we have 1.1 million. And they did this by actually introducing progressive automotive policies. So it can happen. So the vision for Africa, Mike touched on it, is that we believe that hub assemblers will develop, and not everyone can be an assembler. It's very clear. Countries need to focus on their competitive and sustainable advantage into the future. We need scale. It's a very competitive industry, driven by scale. These hubs will be supported by the development of value chains in these regions. And we have much work to do there, but there is huge opportunity for manufacture and supply. Dr. Fikri mentioned there about the production and trade architecture of the policies that are developing across Africa. That's key. That's the architecture of the new Egyptian policy, to produce and trade, to export in volume, low model production, and import multiple models, hopefully duty-free, should there be enough volume and meeting the incentive criteria that will appear in the final matrix. It's very clear that Egypt is a hub assembler in our vision for Africa. And our research shows that by investigating the growth of income of people in Egypt, that by 2035, people who can afford a vehicle will create a demand for at least 510,000 new vehicles from where we are today. And that's conservative looking at the picture. And that excludes the potential for export, which I'm going to share with you now. So the other hub assemblers, in addition to obviously Morocco and South Africa that exist today, these other hub assemblers are currently developing or implementing automotive policies, and they include Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Nigeria, and Kenya, and potentially Ethiopia. So the Egyptian automotive industry will have the opportunity within Africa in a number of fields. And the first is the production and trade of CBUs, and the production and trade architecture that we covered. Also, the opportunity to export vehicle kits and to assemble them in African countries, to invest in component manufacturing in African countries, in either individually or in partnership. And this may not necessarily be initially in a greenfield operation. It can take place in kit form as the volumes grow, so more localization takes place in these countries. And this would be to supply both OEM assembly as the volumes grow, and also to supply the aftermarket. So there will be much opportunity. And we are very thankful that various Egyptian component manufacturers have already joined us on visits to both Kenya and Ghana. And I wish them thank you. Many of you might be in the audience today. And we can link you up to potential customers, to potential partners in these countries. I just want to touch on what Mike mentioned, the rules of origin. The rules of origin have not been agreed in the African Continental Free Trade Area as yet. We do believe that the right rule, so that it actually supports industrialization of the industry, is a 40% originating material. And I know in Africa it's quite a challenge because certain countries are more well developed in auto than others. But it's important that we have a strong level of industrialization or of rules of origin that will encourage real industrialization. Because we don't want to stay at kits, semi-knockdown kits in Africa. We want to move to complete knockdown. So there's great opportunity, the momentum is growing, and I invite Egyptian automotive stakeholders to join us. Come join us in Africa. Come and see what's going on. Come and meet the players and find your opportunity that's going to evolve with this developing industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Now I want to turn to Dr. Marcus Thale. He is the president of Bosch Africa, and he's also the vice president of the AAAM. Dr. Marcus, if you can give us your perspective in terms of how companies like Bosch have or can benefit from the opportunities that Dave has just laid out for Egyptian and African automotive markets. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I would like to build on what Mike Whitfield and also Peter's said, and also build on what we mentioned in terms of our work that we've done on the Egyptian government. Let me take the opportunity to highlight opportunities for the industry. And one thing which is clear
Dr. Marcus, if you can hold for a second, I think there's a problem with the connection.
Okay.
Type. Dr. Marcus, if you can turn off your screen, maybe this will improve the connection network from your end. I'm told that the problem is on your side.
Okay. Can you hear better now?
Slightly better, yes. If you can talk slowly, I think we'll be able to hear you clearly. Go ahead.
Two opportunities. One that I rather see short term, and another one which I rather see as a mid to long term opportunity. And I think it has already been highlighted that volumes are a key topic. And if one now can actually join the volumes from a supplier perspective, from the various countries that have aligned the policy with the help of AAAM, and Ghana have been mentioned, Kenya have been mentioned, but in particular also Egypt and South Africa have been mentioned. And so for us as suppliers, large volume for economies of scale are important. And so I can very well picture, and I've been to Egypt very often, and I currently live in South Africa, that Egyptian supplier companies in certain areas who are already established in Egypt could work, for example, with or in South Africa. And as Dave has just mentioned, either on their own or with partners or similar, and could have a satellite plant. For example, if you have a plant in Egypt already, a satellite plant in South Africa, can only say that also South Africa does today not really have such a degree to localization that there's not room for many companies to come. The second opportunity, rather than the short term, is also on the aftermarket side. And that is in general, not only between now Egypt and South Africa. I would, in my experience, say that 60% of all, or maybe even more, of all aftermarket components that at least we know in our areas in sub-Saharan Africa and in other parts of Africa are fakes. So if we work together with government, as private sector, as government sector, to actually get rid of all these fakes, which are actually also endangering lives, which are making vehicles much less safe than they could be, the market volume today already would be double or triple of what it is. And that is definitely an opportunity, whether it's for a filter manufacturer, for a brake manufacturer, or other manufacturers in that space. Second opportunity that I would like to highlight, which is more mid to long term, that has also been mentioned by Mike Whitfield at the beginning, is the possibility, the potential for the deepening of the value chain and for localization in Africa, essentially based on the mineral resources that we have in Africa. And I like to give one example because we are in the windscreen wiper system manufacturing realm. So we need a lot of copper. And with an electric vehicle, there will be even more the need of copper. And that is found right in the center of Africa, in the copper belt. And I would say today we need to buy this automotive grade copper from elsewhere, but in Africa, either in Asia or from North America, to actually be brought back to Africa after it has been taken out of the earth in Africa to actually be then processed and into automotive grade so that we can use it. And why not doing that in Africa? I mean, that could be, let's say, closer to, for example, where the copper is found, and it's found in Zambia, it could maybe transported to Tanzania, where it could be transported to South Africa for further refining, for further, let's say, winding it around around the motor. But if we're talking about a windscreen wiper system that would be built into a Nissan plant or a plant of another manufacturer in Egypt, why not also drag the container ship up north towards the Suez Channel and do additional value add in Egypt? And from Egypt, it could also come back then, for example, more to southern Africa towards our plants, where we could use it then to finally assemble the windscreen wiper systems. So I just see these short-term opportunities, which is collaborating between the various companies which already exist in African countries, within the countries who've now aligned with the AAAM their automotive policies. That on the one hand, and on the other hand, this mid to long-term opportunity, where I think, I mean, if we're talking today maybe of 10 or 20% localization, if we're talking about these 5 million up from the 1 million vehicles, the market volume for suppliers and the aftermarket is at least 10 times as much as what it is today, and that is enormous. And the amount of job creation, collaboration, but what I really want to emphasize again, collaboration between the African countries is absolutely paramount, and I'm very happy that our colleagues from Fraxer Bank are facilitating that also with the funds that they would provide to actually make our vision happen. So thank you very much, and I look forward to further discussing topics later.
Thank you, Dr. Marcus. Dr. Gainmore Zanamwi, he is the Senior Manager under the Intra-Africa Trade Initiative at the African Export-Import Bank, and where he's responsible for trade facilitation. And in February 2021, there was a memorandum of understanding that was signed between the AAAM and the bank to promote and finance the automotive industry in Africa. If we can ask you, Dr. Gainmore, to just explain to us in brief terms what exactly the bank does, what does this MOU aim to achieve, and what sort of tools, including financial tools, can the bank offer Egyptian automotive industry players seeking to enter other African markets?
Thank you very much, moderator. I hope you can hear me now. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
That's perfect. All right. Apologies. I should have actually joined you physically since I'm here in Cairo, but that has not been possible due to the other commitments. But I've always been committed to this agenda on the automotive industry. I've been working with my colleagues, Dev and Mike, and I think the partnership we did with AAAM is basically a model partnership that we believe can actually be replicated in other industries. Because what we essentially did was that we know that as Afreximbank, we bring in certain value, but we needed now to work with the industry experts to guide us on the key automotive policies that needed to be developed to ensure that we establish an environment where OEMs and component manufacturers can actually be able to produce benefiting from the scale. I think we heard about the demand that has been talked about. So one of the key things that we've been working with AAAM is the development of a continental automotive policy with the support, of course, from the FCFTA Secretariat, which will help us now to create that policy environment at the continental level and to also deal with the issues relating to rules of origin to ensure that we adopt appropriate rules of origin, the 40% local production, and that is also something that the bank really subscribes to. And to make that work, we decided now to come up with a continental automotive policy to ensure that all the other countries can actually buy into the discussions on rules of origin. But for that to happen, they needed to know what support is Afreximbank going to provide to other smaller countries like Botswana, like Rwanda, even Ghana, to help them benefit from this automotive initiative. So then we started working with AAM to develop a continental policy which is now being considered by the AFCFTA Council of Trade Ministers. We hope that it will be adopted early next year. That will then create an environment for the development of a viable automotive industry in the continent. And I know AAM has been assisting countries, of course, including Egypt, to put in place automotive policies, which is now in place for Egypt. And we are also supporting the similar initiative for other countries. And that basically now addresses the policy environment. Once you address the policy environment, you'll be able to now move with cohesion from the national policies to the continental policies to deal with the issue of second-hand cars that are actually stifling demand. And my colleagues have been talking about the demand that we need of up to 5 million. That can only happen if this continental automotive policy is implemented in conjunction with national policies, and Afreximbank will then come in and provide financing. We've got a range of financial products that are available to Egypt as well as other African countries. We actually have got a 1 billion auto financing facility, which we will actually use to facilitate the development of viable automotive industries within the continent, whether that finance is required by those who are doing assembly, those who are distributors, those who are basically doing component manufacturing. We provide support for OEMs if they also need guarantees, if they are going into the other risky African countries where they are not comfortable. Afreximbank can either provide finance or provide a guarantee to give assurance to the OEMs or the large component manufacturers. We are also working with other local financial institutions to provide support to small component manufacturers. We could basically provide a credit line to an entity in Egypt so that that entity can only lend to some of the small component manufacturers. I think it's very important to help them to be able to produce genuine parts, genuine components, as my colleague Marcus highlighted. There's a lot of these fake products that are circulating, endangering the lives of people and the environment. So we need to be able to deal with that. One probably last thing that I want to mention is that for all these things to happen, we need to do it through regional value chains. As Dave highlighted, not all the 55 African countries will be able to establish an assembly plant, but they can participate in regional value chains. We've just completed a regional value chain study for the Economic Commission for West Africa, ECOWAS, which has now been endorsed by the ministers. We are going to replicate that at the continental level to actually identify at the continental level which countries are capable of producing which components and supplying them to the hubs located either in Southern Africa, Northern Africa, here in Egypt, or East Africa, West Africa. So that study on regional value chain will actually commence next year at the continental level. We believe that that will then allow us to be able to do regional value chains. Just to give you one practical example, I think my colleague talked about the copper wires. It's one of the things that we've already identified as part of the regional value chains, but we've gone beyond that. We are now looking at the possibility of doing battery precursors in Zambia and DRC. We're actually working on a joint project between DRC and Zambia where they could collaborate to establish a precursor plant. And we know that these two countries are endowed in what they call green metals. and we've got a lot of these for electric vehicles. So we are already advanced in this project, and it basically means that if you add value from the production of minerals, the industry is worth about 11 billion. You only get a small percentage of the 11 billion. But if you add more value to this industry, add the precursor plant, you may actually be able to jump from 11 billion to more than $387 billion. And then if you go to electric vehicles, if you are now producing electric vehicles, you'll be looking at a market of currently around plus or minus 7 trillion, which could jump into more than probably 45 trillion of electric vehicles. So we really need to position Africa also to tap into the electric vehicle market. I know it's not going to be a sprint, but we need to start taking the baby steps now. So these are some of the issues that I just wanted to highlight, and we look forward to working with everybody here in Egypt, AAAM, to also showcase all these things at the Intra-African Trade Fair that we are organizing next year in Abidjan in November 21 to 27. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Gameware. If I can stay with you and ask you a follow-up question. You touched on the Secretariat of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Can you talk a bit about or expand more in terms of what the industrial priorities are for the Secretariat and what role the African Bank is playing in supporting them?
Thank you very much. I think the bank has taken it upon its shoulders to ensure that the AFCFTA is successful, and we believe that it's going to succeed. We have been providing financial support to get the Secretariat to work, and we've been supporting them to identify potential regional value chains that they can actually support to ensure that the AFCFTA is implemented. One of them is the automotive regional value chain that I've talked about, which is very critical, and we are going to be doing more work to ensure that we develop those regional value chains. And we look forward to working with the stakeholders here in Egypt to ensure that they actually tap into the automotive regional value chain and provide key support. Egypt is well advanced in terms of probably production capacity, technology, and what have you. So there's an opportunity for Egypt to work with other countries in Southern Africa, in West Africa, to promote automotive regional value chains. But the other value chains that will be going into that will also support what we are doing in the auto industry, include the steel. We'll be looking at the steel industry to ensure that we actually support the production of the various components of steel that will support not only the auto industry, but the construction industry, as well as the entire manufacturing industry. We are also looking at the textiles value chain. The textile and clothing industry is very, very important. That has also been prioritized, and we'll be working with the AFCFTA Secretariat to ensure that we develop that sector. We are also looking at the pharmaceutical sector, as well as the agro-processing sector, to ensure that when probably two countries in the world are fighting, the whole continent don't go hungry. These are some of the value chains that we are working with our colleagues at the AFCFTA Secretariat. And we believe that if we do all these things, they will actually boost the production and the trade of various products, which will actually lead to an increase in GDP. When GDP increases, it means that there will be even more market for the automotive industry. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Going back to Mike, if you can kindly, and staying on the topic of the African Continental Free Trade Area, Mike, if you can share with us your thoughts in terms of how this area is going to support trade and industrial cooperation among African countries, and particularly the matter of the industry partnership agreements among African countries. Where do you see this going, and how do you think Egypt can benefit from this?
Well, I think as we referred to earlier, it's a journey. First, a country requires to have its own, let's take automotive policy. Then from there we move to trade pacts between those countries, and that then comes into the total Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. One of the key elements for automotive to take off is going to be the rules of origin, which hopefully, as Gamal referred to, and Dave, that can be concluded early in the new year. But what is important is from there and through the trade agreement, we can address the issues of logistics, movement between countries, movement of goods, movement of people. Importantly, we can look at, going forward, a continental homologation of automotive standards, very important. How we approach used vehicles. If we look at Africa today, the three largest markets in Africa in terms of new vehicles is Morocco, Egypt, and South Africa, and all of them have a very strong policy on bringing used vehicles into the country. And part of this interaction on this continental agreement is to address the issue of used vehicles, to ensure that we can have a continental tariff, and very importantly, the real growth in this market is going to happen with access to finance. We cannot create mobility and increase the ownership number of vehicles per thousand unless we allow people to access affordable finance. I think if we look in terms of the Egyptian market, 100+ million people, total at the peak, I think the TIV was, total industry volume was 300,000+. With up-to-date, modern, flexible automotive finance products, this market can easily become the largest in Africa. So if we come back to the point, the Continental Free Trade Agreement is the catalyst that will help create the world's largest trading bloc, and from automotive, it will hopefully unlock the potential for people to participate in that value chain. But as I said, the key is not going to be every country manufacturing vehicles. The key is on a regional basis, we all cooperate to support that value chain. And as a catalyst and a start, we should also look at creating auto pacts between those countries that already have auto policies.
Thank you, Mike. And going back to Dr. Marcus Thiel, if you can kindly elaborate on how you see the opportunities presented by Africa's natural resources, including mineral, and how you see Bosch leveraging this in developing the automotive industry here in Africa.
As had already been highlighted just now, I mean, the copper value chain is one thing. And as I also mentioned, or was mentioned, battery precursors, I mean, there's lithium. But if we're talking, for example, also about fuel cell vehicles as an alternative to battery electric vehicles, platinum, iridium, everything that is required for this, a majority of that is found in Southern Africa, for example, or on the African continent. And companies as Bosch, we are always looking at where can we get reliable supply, obviously not necessarily only single source, but ideally several sources. And in Africa is becoming more and more, whether it is North Africa or other parts of Africa, is becoming more and more in the focus of companies like ours to actually elaborate also or making use of that value chain, which is in value chain opportunities which are in Africa. And rubber had been mentioned by Mike Whitfield earlier. So there is a lot of opportunity, and if I now also look at the opportunities that the hydrogen economy will bring, and all of the opportunities of then local energy production. Energy costs electricity costs is definitely one of the challenges also for industrialization of any industry right now in Africa. Now the hydrogen economy, which again, and here now natural resources are actually solar and wind that we have in Africa in abundance and at the most favorable costs compared to other parts in the world. And it's not only Southern Africa, but it's also Egypt, together with Saudi Arabia. So there is opportunities if we really look at it from an ecosystem point of view, that can actually industrialize if we make use of all the natural resources and the natural endowment that Africa actually has. And as I mentioned, we as Bosch are considering this. I will participate tomorrow at the German African Business Summit here in Sandton. That's the reason why I can unfortunately would not travel to to Egypt, and we will probably sign an MOU tomorrow regarding using large engines to actually internal combustion engines to burn green hydrogen, which will be CO2 neutral, and they can be a solution also for trucks and buses on the African continent. The hydrogen could be produced or should be produced actually here in this part of the world, just like it could be produced in Egypt, and we can use it locally. And these type of internal combustion engines, if other parts of the world no longer want to use them or produce them, we can do all of these type of things in Africa.
Thank you, Dr. Marcus. I'll turn now to Dave. Dave, you're a strong advocate for inter-African trade and industrial integration in the automotive sector. Can you tell us why you think this is Africa's O2 opportunity?
Yeah, if you look at the previous narrative around the opportunity, we reflected on emerging middle class, the rapid urbanization, the population growth. But we have a different situation now. Those still exist. But since the 1st of January 2021, when the AFCFTA was formed, we have a central organization in the Secretariat there, which has the mandate for the African Union to industrialize Africa. And auto is one of those priorities which Gainmore touched on. And that's very important. We work actively with the Secretariat. Where I'm going to here is we have the right partners. And I want to share who those partners are, because it's absolutely critical to making it happen. The second is we have the financial support of Afreximbank and a lead development bank on the continent. We have the private sector supporting this vision that's growing. Our membership is growing. We're getting members from across Africa, including Egypt, and we've got a good membership base from Egypt. That's critical. And we encourage members to join us that believe in the industrialization of Africa and that are passionate and will support this journey. We are also hearing the political willingness of specific countries. We have a close relationship also with the Secretariat, so we've sat in Council of Ministers meetings and presented our technical position on the rules of origin in a number of meetings. And one can hear the narrative that's changing. There's a belief in this industry that it can create significant contribution to the economy and employment. And that narrative is growing. And there's a political willingness then to implement these auto policies that are progressive, where one has to deal with the used car imports and regulations on the likes of components. And so we have the right partnership that's working together. We also, just to reiterate what's been said about minerals and natural resources, we really have a great opportunity. I think the world is rebalancing at the moment and looking at its supply chain. And it's an ideal opportunity for African countries to negotiate the transformation of minerals and supply into the new energy vehicle value chains. So my view is that it is Africa's time now. And it's a great opportunity, but this will not happen by chance. It requires deliberate and bold leadership from both the public and the private sector to actually drive this vision. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.